listened to the President's introduction, and it's just wonderful developments happening within GMIT, and it's great to hear about sustainability being pushed way up the agenda in terms of strategic action for GMIT. So congratulations to everyone involved, including the President, for taking the initiative so quickly into her tenure as President of GMIT. Also, I'd like to thank John Barrymore for stepping in so quickly to deliver the first presentation. And I think I'll probably skip one or two slides here because John has really covered so one or two things I was going to cover in the opening slides really well. So no point in rehashing that. So my conversation or my discussion today is around an approach that we've taken in DCU to mapping the Sustainable Development Goals within the curriculum. So we were faced with a challenge. I suppose DCU has been very proactive, much like UCC. And John, it was wonderful to see that timeline of activities showing the legacy within UCC of addressing environmental and sustainability agendas. But DCU likewise has been involved for quite a long period of time in trying to address sustainability matters, and a lot of work has been done by the Director of Sustainability, Sam Fahy, in terms of addressing I suppose efficiencies in terms of energy and waste and so on in the wider campus, but also in terms of getting involved with connected communities of DCU. So we had this third arm, which was the curriculum. And while we were aware there was lots of wonderful work, again, like John, we knew that there were strengths in particular faculties, and particular lecturers had personal agendas in terms of promoting sustainability. We really weren't sure in terms of the SDGs to what extent they were being addressed across the curriculum in general. So myself and my colleague, Dr. Ben Mallon, who unfortunately just can't be with us this morning, we set out in 2019 to explore where the SDGs were being embedded or integrated in the curriculum across the university. And we were doing this really because we know that as part of Sustainable Development Goal 4, there's a particular target that all learners, we must ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. And right in there, I've highlighted in blue, is the role of education for sustainable development, human rights education, global citizenship education. So we knew we really had to get going to try and progress or to accelerate the progression of this agenda. And the indicator for target 4.7 is here at the bottom of the screen. And this is the extent to which global citizenship education, education for sustainable development are mainstreamed at all levels of education. That includes higher education. So they want to see it in national policies, they wanted to see it in the curricula, particularly in teacher education and student assessment. So it was with this in mind that we set out on our journey to try and explore to what extent the SDGs were already being addressed. And what's very interesting is in the last year, the United Nations General Assembly, well, in 2019, the General Assembly approved this new, I suppose, like a pathway or a framework. It's ESD for 2030. And it really is a roadmap of what needs to be advanced in terms of educating for sustainable development over the next 10 years. And within that, they're calling out things like advancing the policy. So they want to see ministries of education integrating references to how education for sustainable development is going to be addressed at all levels of education. They want to see whole institution approaches to it. So the notion that education is separate from the broader activities in a university or a school setting. They want that to be addressed. They want to kind of bring those together. Educators, they want us to develop capacity development opportunities there, to build capacity by helping or training up our lecturers and educators on what ESD is and how to empower learners with regard to sustainable development. They also want us to provide opportunities for youth engagement and, of course, to work and empower the connected communities. So if looking at this plan for 2030, it really isn't terribly different to its predecessor, which was the Global Action Plan that ran from 2015 to 2019. The only difference that I could see, or the main difference I could see between the agenda for the GAP programme and for ESD for 2030 is its focus on the SDGs. So what they want us to do as educators is they want us to educate for sustainable development using the challenges, the 17 challenges that have been articulated within the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030. So that gave us, I suppose, the impetus to really get involved and start thinking about how do we figure out what is being covered with respect to the SDGs in the curriculum at DCU. And we set out, without following, any predetermined plan. Myself and Ben, quite a few conversations to begin with to have a think about, what exactly were we looking for? And so what we had said to management is we're going to look for the presence of the SDGs. And as we moved through the process, we realized, well, there's two things involved in that. There's the visibility of the SDG themes. So whether, there's a program that's addressing poverty or health or climate action, so that is it addressing or not? But we also need to know to what extent it addressed it. So the intensity of the SDG present. So how many references, where were they located, for example, within module descriptor? Was it in the learning outcomes? Was it in the reading list? Because all of that can make a difference in terms of how it is promoted in practice. So we decided that we would use NVivo, which is a qualitative data analysis software that's available, I'd say, in most, if not all, higher education institutions. And this software is typically used if you have interviews or focus groups or documents in terms of analysing that type of data. So we thought that we would use NVivo to organise and search for the SDG related terms. And then we would use the module descriptors from the various courses. So we would upload the module descriptors into NVivo, and we would search through the module title, description, learning outcomes, indicative syllabus, and reference. So we would organize the data within NVivo so that you could isolate learning outcomes or indicative syllabus or references. And then we also composed a visual representation of the coverage. So we felt it was very important that there was some sort of a way to show chairs of programs and executive deans of faculties the SDG coverage, something that was accessible. So we had in our head that we'd like to do some sort of a visual representation of the coverage. And obviously, we were very thorough in terms of analysing the results that we got. So when data was generated from searches, we went into the module descriptors to look to check for accuracy in terms of the match with the SDG topic, and also for relevance. So I'm just taking a minute to talk about NVivo, just in case anyone is thinking of maybe adopting this structure. In theory, it seemed great. It seems like we could just pop books of modules into NVivo for each faculty. So if a faculty had 10 programs, undergraduate programs, we would just upload the 10 books of modules and do the searches. Turned out to be a little bit more complicated than that. So we started off by framing anchor terms. That's what we called them for the SDGs. And these were basically key terms associated with it. So SDG 1 is no poverty. Poverty obviously would have been an anchor term there. Good health and well-being, SDG 3, anchor terms there are health and well-being. Myself and Ben spent a considerable amount of time working through the indicators, the targets and indicators for each of the SDGs. And I think your president noted that there are almost 150 targets within the SDGs. So there's quite a bit of work. We ended up originally with over 300 different terms, but we've refined that down to 57, and I'll explain that, why that was in a moment. So I explained that we use the books of modules for each program. So within DCU, I'm sure it's the same in other institutions and institutes like GMIT. But we have an internal software called, I think it's Akari Course Builder. And for every program, we upload the modules for the program. So we have a book of modules for each degree program in the university. So what we did, we simply, first of all, just downloaded the books of modules for various programs across faculties. And then what we did, and this was really a quality check, because sometimes the books of modules are updated. Sometimes modules end up still being in the book, but they're not actually on the academic structure for that year. So we ended up having to cross-check with chairs of programs in terms of academic structures, just to make sure that we had all the modules that were on the program during 2019-2020. So that took a little bit of time. And then we set about within NVivo what we call coding and content mapping. So we labeled each program. For those of you familiar with NVivo will understand this as an individual case. We effectively copied the content we had separate sections we had separate sections within NVivo for the module section. So you typically have a module description, you have learning outcomes, you have indicative content, you have assessment, workload, reading lists. This should have been very easy to do, but unfortunately, the PDF that was output from Course Builder, so the book of module was a PDF document, it wasn't a normal PDF structure. And so in our first couple of runs, when we tested our searches, it wasn't bringing out the content that it should have been, which required us to recode it and copy actual learning outcomes from each module into a category. Sounds complicated. It was more messy and difficult than we anticipated. So it took us a couple of months in the end to kind of get this process done. Ben was working with me 2 days a week. So when I say a couple of months, probably about 20 to 30 days, but mainly because of this problem with the PDF, the format for the book of modules. We then conducted the search queries using anchor terms, and from the outcome or the output of these search queries, we were able then to ascertain what SDGs were covered and when. So I have here just first of all a sample of some of the anchor terms. Now, if you do any sort of a literature search, you'll see that a number of universities, I think it was across Australia and New Zealand, They, back in 2017, I think it was, or 2018, they identified more than 1,000 search terms that could be used in terms of mapping content for the SDGs. Like I said, we ended up with around 300, but we refined it back to 57, and it was mainly because of a technical problem. Ben was doing the searches and his laptop was crashing once we had more than 57 search terms. It was during COVID. He couldn't access a different computer, so we refined it to 57. But these are anchor terms or root terms, so we think we have pretty good coverage with these at any rate. We also search for the transversal theme of culture, because culture is one of those topics that is seen as pivotal within the SDGs. It's very much the UN sees the safeguarding and the promotion of culture as being at the heart of the SDGs. So we felt it would be important to search to see if the word culture appeared and in what context, and whether that aligned with any of the SDGs. So this is just explaining the different sections of the module descriptor that we searched in. And we needed to validate search results. So for example, Sustainable Development Goal 7, our anchor term there was energy. But if you read Sustainable Development Goal 7, it's really about ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all. They're talking about power usage in the home and so on. I have an example, the first example up here, that was, we allowed that to be included because that's pretty much as you'd expect. Discuss the importance of current topics such as waste management, energy usage and carbon emissions to business. That is a direct relevance, so that's something we kept in. This reference here, for example, so this is in vivo extracted from the module descriptor, the exact reference and text around that. So it found energy here within this particular module, but we excluded it because this actually is talking about energy balancing within cell biology. So it's important in terms of the module that it's being offered in, but it's not energy as it as is meant within Sustainable Development Goal 7. Another example here, really practical one, Sustainable Development Goal 8 is about achieving full and productive employment, decent work for all, for women and for men by 2030. So it's really about the world of work and inclusion, diversity and so on within the workplace. So the first example here, using the anchor term work, we can see here it was a learning outcome within a particular module. It said apply psychological theory in work and organizational settings. So that particular module is aligned to the world of work. It's looking at the psychology of work, of teams, team building, team working and so on. Whereas here in this particular module, they're talking about demonstrating group work. And we felt it was a stretch to kind of tie that in. We know that teamwork is important for work, but this particular module wasn't related to the world of work. So just giving you an idea of how we included or excluded particular items. So in terms of what we found, I've just picked one faculty as an example here, and obviously for confidentiality and privacy reasons, we're not going to name faculties or programs or indeed modules within this presentation. So what we have here on the left-hand side is we can see this faculty in DCU. We saw there was the presence of, or the visibility of 15 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. In fact, across this faculty, we didn't find any material relating to Sustainable Development Goal 2, no poverty, or to Sustainable Development Goal 6, which is clean water and sanitation. And over here on the right-hand side, what you can see is really far more interesting, because this is telling you the intensity or the degree of reference to each of the goals. So what we can see is in this particular faculty, there were high accumulations. So there was a high number of references relating to Sustainable Development Goal 8 and 9. So Sustainable Development Goal 8 is to do with decent work and employment. Sustainable Development Goal 9 is to do with industry, innovation and infrastructure. And there were pretty high accumulations of content relating to these two areas within this faculty, which might give you a hint as to maybe its disciplinary focus. There were moderate accumulations within Goal 4, and there were low accumulations in Goals 7, 11 and 12. So Goal 7 is affordable and clean energy. Goal 11 is sustainable cities and communities, and Goal 12 is sustainable consumption and production. And there were very low accumulations. So when we're talking about very low accumulations at a faculty level, we're typically talking about, you know, just traces or mentions, for example, of climate action or something to do with life on land. You know, within module descriptors, there's no mass of references in this. So at a faculty level, this visual was very helpful, because it gave a sense that, first of all, that there was a presence, you know, the SDGs are being addressed, but in terms of focus, Goals 8 and 9 are the primary focus of this faculty, with a lesser focus on 4, 7, 11 and 12. And that's interesting for an executive dean to know and to explore further. Within each of the programs, so this particular faculty, we reviewed 10 of the programs that they had. We were also able, so each of these bars is an undergraduate degree program. Sorry, each of these columns is an undergraduate degree program. So we were able to show within each degree program which SDGs were addressed and the number. So we can see over here that program 7, there's a very high number. There's 13 SDGs were addressed to some extent in this program, and here program 8 and program 10 we're seeing just 6, the lowest number of SDGs being addressed in those programs. And again, this gives you a snapshot of what's happening across programs. In terms of the number of references, so the red line here, that refers to the number of references to those anchor terms. So if the term poverty or health or that appeared. So the red line, we can see from the red line that the range is somewhere between 105 to 220 references. So program 8 over here, it had the lowest, I think, of around 105 references, and 105 references, and program 3 maybe was one of the higher with 220 references. The blue line tells you the number of modules that contain those references to the SDGs. So we can see again, relatively high number, from a low of 4 for program 8, a low of 14 modules rather for program 8 to 65 modules. Sorry, that's program 10, my mistake. A low of 14 for program 10 to a high of 65 in program 9, I think. So again, this gives you some sense of, you know, the coverage within a module and the number of references appearing and the number of modules that they appear in for each program. So what I've done here is I've just picked 4 programs just to move down a little bit further. So this is now, these here represent particular programs. This is program 1. And it just shows you that, again, in terms of visibility, there were in total, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Sustainable Development Goals. We found references relating to 8 Sustainable Development Goals in this program. But over here, unsurprising given the faculty profile, we can see that there were the highest accumulation was in SDG 8, a moderate accumulation in SDG 9, and low accumulations in 4 and 12, and again, very low for the other ones. So this is really useful for a chair of a program. And within the information that we provided, we were able to list the particular modules that had these references in, so that the chairs could, could identify the modules that are aligning or attempting to address SDG issues. Program 3 now, we can see again, there was thematic content. This is much more robust when you look at the picture on the left, the visibility. We found thematic content relating to 12 Sustainable Development Goals here. We found a total of 221 matching references across 67 modules in this program. And when we look across to the right-hand side, we can see there were very high accumulations again for SDG 8. And very similar pattern to the last one in terms of the high and the moderate in SDG 9, and lower accumulations in 7, 11 and 12, and then just traces. So literally just a mention within a learning outcome or within a book list or within indicative content for the remainder of them. And again, program 7, we're seeing 13 SDGs. So this particular program addressed, I think, the maximum number of SDGs in that faculty. And there were over 217 references found. When we look to the right, we can see, once again, a similar pattern. And this is the thing that, when you explore by faculties, understandably, you're going to see more references to thematic areas that one associates with a particular discipline. So I won't go into more depth there. And again, in program 10, this one I chose to show because even though it has the least number of SDGs covered, I think in total there's just 6 SDGs that we found material relating to. And in total, though, there were 117 references. And in fact, there was quite a number of references in relating to goals 7 and 8. So we began to see, even though there might be overall across the program less accumulation, we can see density perhaps in goals that other programs haven't covered. So SDG 7 featured stronger in this program than any of the other programs. So when we drop down into the module descriptors, we were able to see what we've called seeding, and then green shoots, and then blooming, which is on the next page. So seeding, as we have classified it, is basically where there's a mention that's relevant somewhere within the module descriptor. So maybe a single reference to it. So if we look here at the first extract, this comes from a module descriptor. It's in the module description section, and it says, this module emphasizes the centrality and breadth of consumption in contemporary consumers' lives. Students will also be challenged to reflect on their own experience as consumers. So we can see straight away that's a direct reference to SDG 12, but it's just a single reference in that module. and it wasn't developed further. So we consider that the seeding. So we might have expected maybe to see more material, maybe something in the learning outcomes or in the indicative syllabus or in the reading list, but we didn't. So there may be work for the lecturer there. They're obviously covering it, but maybe just to articulate that within the module descriptor. I'll pick this one here, learning outcomes. So this one was, again, the learning outcomes said articulate climate change issues, the contribution, bizarrely, of the aviation sector, but we'll pass over that, but the contribution of the aviation sector to climate change, and the emergent climate change policies impacting the aviation sector. So what we have there is possibly, and controversially, a module that's examining the aviation sector, but importantly, looking at climate change and you know, how the aviation industry is impacting that and what it can do better. So this notion of seeding was just to give you an idea that across different parts of the module descriptor, you could come across content. Here, for example, this is the indicative content section. These are all different module descriptors, product innovation, so tied into SDG 9, and then here assessment report based on students' work placement. So that ties into SDG 8, which is looking at the world of work. So we managed to isolate you know, examples of seeding. Green shoots is where you see it maybe just go beyond. You might have seen it in 2 sections, but blooming is where you see it across multiple sections. And I've taken 2 examples here of modules. The first one, module C, aligns with SDG 11, which is sustainable cities and communities. And this particular module, we can see that the module descriptor is talking about the growth of cities, unsustainable and otherwise. The learning outcomes, very clear why cities form, spatial structure, hierarchy, the economic reasoning behind it. It was also appeared in the indicative content, and in the reading list we were seeing references to urban economics and urban development and so on. So we could see references to SDG 11, you know, across that particular module. Similarly here in module, we've just called it D, we saw a lot of references relating to innovation, for example, and this particular module is an enterprise and innovation module, so probably no surprise there. But what is interesting is you know, it follows all the way through from the description to the learning outcomes to the assessment and the reading list. And they had some excellent other readings there that looked at sustainable innovation and design thinking and different things like that. So in terms of our work on mapping, so we have at the moment what we've been trying to do is set up meeting with chairs and academic staff. The executive deans have a copy of the report, but the next step is really to work with staff on the ground. And one of the benefits of undertaking this exercise is we're very familiar with the modules. More familiar than we ever would be by, you know, doing some sort of a survey or other method of trying to find out what people are doing. So it's very granular in terms of the information that we have, but I think it gives us a really true and authentic sense of what has been done in these programs and how that can be built on, as John Barrymore talked about. You know, it's a strengths model. We know people are doing good work, but it's developing that. And we're going to move forward to offer workshops on integrating education for sustainability and sustainable development. And just in the last 10 minutes or so of this presentation, I wanted to talk about what these workshops would involve and what the focus there would be. So it's going to be a rapid ride through this, but I do feel it's important. I mean, mapping where the SDGs appear, or the themes or the topics that embody the SDG appears is important. But what's most important is how the learners engage and interact with when they're in lectures. And module descriptors can only give you so much information. So we already know that from the pillars of learning for the 21st century, that the last pillar here, which Bernard Coombs spoke about or articulated in the year 2000, is really the one that's pivotal for education for sustainable development. Effectively, we're trying to enable learners to transform themselves and society. So through that process, they obviously learn to know, to do, to be, to live together. But without this transformation towards the betterment of society, towards more equitable futures for all, you know, the purpose of learning doesn't really get translated into action. So there are three dimensions to this. There's sustainability knowledge, and that mapping of the SDG themes that I just talked about, that's an important part of that, because obviously Education 2030, ESD for 2030, what they want us to do is focus on those challenges articulated within the Sustainable Development Goals. So we do need to make sure that they are present in our curricula. But we also need to recognize, and John was very strong on this in the first presentation, that knowledge comes from many different disciplines. We have interdisciplinary knowledge, but we also need to consider the transdisciplinary aspects of that. We also, very importantly, need to think about the type of competencies that we're trying to foster among learners. And I'm just going to do a little bit on that now, so I'll skip there. And we also need to be conscious that we are fostering sustainability mindsets so that students want to take action for sustainability, want to transform the way they live and what they value. So just in terms of these sustainability competencies, these have been articulated for quite a while. Arnon Vik and his colleagues back in 2011, they originally articulated the 5 that are highlighted there in blue: systems thinking, anticipatory, which is futures thinking, normative, which is a values competency, strategic competency, collaboration, and integrated problem solving. And Marco Rickman, I think it was, brought in these 2, critical thinking and self-awareness, from some of his work in 2012, 2013. But UNESCO now has grouped all of these together, and they say these are the competencies that we should be fostering within education for sustainable development. So in practice, what does it look like? Well, if it's systems thinking competency, you want graduates that for systems that you want graduates that will be able to engage in sustainability problem solving. They can identify intervention points, critical actors, they can test transition strategies, so they can analyze complex systems, and they can think about how systems are embedded with different domains and different scales from the local to the global. This anticipatory competence or futures thinking, this is something that's very close to my heart. I had a sabbatical for all of 2020, and the purpose of that was to build my own knowledge and skills within this particular field. This is something that I'm developing modules for at the moment that we'll be running with our own students in DCU. But basically, with futures thinking, you want to develop graduates who can anticipate how sustainability problems might evolve over time, and they can understand and evaluate multiple kinds of futures, so possible futures, probable, and also desirable futures. So there are a whole set of skills involved in this, including the ability to forecast, backcast, scenario building, visioning, envisioning. So lots of work that would need to happen at that interface of the lecturer and the student. The normative competency or values thinking, in terms of this, you would want graduates to be able to assess the impact of sustainability values, principles, goals and targets on themselves, on others, to think about the trade-offs that they will have to make, and the whole notion of uncertain knowledge and contradictions. Strategic thinking, again, action-oriented competencies, so the ability to collectively develop and implement innovative actions that further sustainability at the local and further afield. And this is very much tied into the last competency, which is integrative problem solving. Collaboration competency, again, the ability to learn from others, to respect the needs, perspectives, actions of others, to be empathetic, and to deal with conflicts and collaborate, engage in collaborative and participatory problem solving. Critical thinking, again, I don't think I need to spend time on this. There's the ability to question norms, practices and values, to reflect on one's own values, perceptions and actions, but importantly, to be able to take a position within the sustainability discourse. And self-awareness, again, to be able to reflect on one's own role in the local community and global society, to continually evaluate and motivate one's actions, and to be able to deal with one's feelings and desires. And the last one, which includes, I think, a photo from somewhere over in Galway, if I remember correctly, this integrative problem solving competency is the ability to apply different problem solving frameworks to complex sustainability problems. So just my final comments here. Those competencies I just talked about, they are something that happens at the interface of teaching and learning. And to do that, you obviously have to have content, but you also have to have the appropriate pedagogy. In terms of the way programs are developed and the way ESD has been integrated in the past, I think one of the first approaches that people took was just to bolt on sustainability modules to existing courses. And the evidence is that doesn't really work. It's better if you can build in, or what I call infuse, sustainability across modules. So that means thinking about how those competencies can be developed through working across a number of modules, rather than just embedding them in a particular module. The best option, if you have it, is to rebuild or redesign programs. Now, and I'm going to finish on this, we're very fortunate in DCU in that we've just received funding through the government's Human Capital Initiative to redesign and also build new programs around that. And some of these programs are, I think one was released on Twitter yesterday, are looking specifically at global challenges, such as those defined within the SDGs, but also DCU has committed to using challenge-based learning as its signature pedagogy. And challenge-based learning is very much focused on integrative problem solving. So by default, within the DCU programs moving forward, we're going to see that a lot of those competencies I've just articulated being either built into programs or new programs designed with those as a signature pedagogy.